Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of In the Spotlight. I'm Mike Panici. I'm really excited today because you were a fan in the 70s of Little House on the Prairie. This woman today is one of the most recognizable people on that show. She played, of course, Nellie Oleson for, I would say, 7 or 8 seasons. And listen, her career has just been one thing after the other. She's a credit to the industry, and it is my honor to introduce to you Miss Alison Arngrim. Allison, thank you for coming on today. It's a real
Hi,
honor for me.
thank you. Thank you indeed. 7 years. I guess it's 7 years plus one episode because I did 7 years and then
Right,
they had me back for a one-off in season 9, which is crazy.
right. Well, Allison, I look at it this way. It's always amazing when you hear the stories about how people got their foot in the door in the business and stuff like that. And you did quite a few television commercials before you landed the part of Little House, correct? And you were also a child model as well.
Well,
So
I mean,
just talk about that a little bit. Yeah.
yeah, okay. We tried. I know I attempted to do modeling. We certainly took enough pictures, but yeah, was working steadily from age 5 until about 11. In fact, my SAG card says members since 1967, which is like amazing. And what happened is I was doing commercials and TV. I was on a show called Juvenile Jury, just sort of a rip off of Kids Say the Darndest Things. I did an episode of Room 222, a bunch of those things. I actually did a movie when I was 10 called Throw Out the Anchor. It was very silly. And when I was about 11, I wasn't working very much. And my my father actually said, you might not work again. It's a problem with child actors. You get in your teens. And then, of course, I got Little House at 12. So when people say, are you making a comeback? I say, oh, no, Little House on the Prairie was the comeback. I had an entire career in that Little House on the Prairie. So I think I'm on my 57th comeback at this point.
And interestingly enough, Allison, I think some people, if they followed the show, they know, but if some are watching it today, because it's on everywhere in reruns, which is great, but they probably don't realize that it's based on a true story. It was the books that Laura Ingalls wrote. I mean, and just to see that what it was like living back then, because I mean, they made it work and they made the most of the life back then. There was no TV, there was, no not a lot of electricity. I don't think
No,
any. And
yeah.
yeah. So
Towards like the later 1800s, you had electricity in the city, not out in Walnut
yeah,
Grove, that's for sure. Well, yeah, I mean, Laura Ingalls Wilder, great American author, the Laura books, she wrote them. They came out in the 1930s at what was the height of the Great Depression. And here were these stories about her childhood in the 1800s, in like 1870s, about 1874, there was actually quite a recession. People don't, we all about the 1974 recession, we know about that. But in the 1800s, they had a recession. Prices had gone up, things were a mess. So her family really had it rough. And when they were in Minnesota, there really was a locust, a grasshopper plague, and the crops. So a lot of the events were legitimately things that did happen. And so their times were not only difficult in the 1800s, but the Ingalls had it particularly rough. They did not really have any money for most of their lives. It was finally when they stopped farming and moved into town, they finally got a life together. But she wrote about her difficult childhood in these books, and they were smash in the Great Depression because everyone was having a hard time reading about how these people made it through really terrible conditions. So in the 1970s, Michael Landon comes off Bonanza, and he's like a big sex symbol because he was Little Joe and everyone's in love with him. And these women who'd grown up reading the books because they were a big hit in the 50s, they kept getting reissued, were in love with Little Joe. So what does he do? He winds up doing the TV series of the Little House on the Prairie books, except he plays Pa. Except he plays kind of sexy, shirtless Pa because the real Pa wasn't that good looking. But so Michael Landon knew what he was doing, so it was a smash, and people love the show now for the same reasons they did in 1974 and why they love the books then. No matter how difficult your life is, the Ingalls somehow got through something worse, and people love this. And as I said, the problems of the Ingalls of the whole world. I mean, the show's all over the world, and I meet people from other countries, and they say they can identify because, well, the Ingalls, they're poor. They live in a small house with a lot of kids, and they never have any money. And yeah, people can identify with that.
right. And let me ask you this, Allison. It's not easy, and this is what I think sometimes a lot of people don't understand is that it's not easy for children to play these parts. You got to keep their attention together. Like, they're still kids. Sometimes they're going to get bored at times when they're doing stuff. So I've always felt like so many child actors, like, I think of Gary Coleman and how great he was on Different Strokes. I think of yourself and how great you did with Nellie. And I think of Melissa too, how great she was. But it really is a credit that these kids do such a tremendous job. And again, it's great directors guiding them and things like that. But really, these kids, when they play a part, I mean, they just look like exceptional actors, like they've been doing it their whole lives. And that's
They
really a
have.
credit to the hard work they put in. So talk about that a little bit.
Well, they literally have. You said they've been doing the whole, they have. When the child actors you saw in Little House and most shows, many of these children start working as toddlers. And most of they literally have been working their entire lives. And the kids on Little House were all super professionals. They were all children who had worked before doing something. They had all had multiple, they weren't famous yet, but they all had multiple TV gigs. I don't know of anybody on Little House was their first job except basically the babies, the baby Carey twins and the baby Grace twins. And I think Jonathan Gilbert, who played my brother, but everyone else had worked extensively in commercials and TV. And I was just talking to my friend Pat Laberge, was Andy Garvey in the show, and he was saying, you know, when Robert De Niro does a dramatic scene, when he's done, he's done. He can go chill out, have a cigarette, go to his trailer. He doesn't have to go off into another room and work on his algebra homework and finish his 3 hours of mandated school time and write a book report. But child actors on the set, we had 4 hours work, 3 hours school, 1 hour rest recreation. It didn't matter what intense thing you were doing, like some of the scenes that Melissa Gilbert did. These child actors, brilliant performance. They're crying, they're doing all this stuff. And then when they're done with that scene, they go, well, we're going to go light the other scene. You need to get back to school, and you had to do your schoolwork, and you were expected not to take a break, but to go back into the other room and finish your biology homework. And that's a really weird thing. And as Pat was saying too, he says as child actors were expected to just pop it out instantaneously, whereas they might take more time off with adult. Now, thank God on Little House on the Prairie, we did have Michael Landon, who would take more time with the kids than most people usually did. Usually child actors were kind of, I mean, treated as, it's an original version of AI. They can produce it instantaneously. But on Little House, we were allowed a little more leeway, but it really is a job. I mean, people wonder about that, like, well, is you saying like, don't the children get bored, or then you'd be fired. I mean, it's unfortunate. It's whatever age you're at, 6, 12, 9, you've gone to work. And you have to be there for 9 hours, counting lunch, and do the 3 hour school as well as the 4 hours work. And it's really is a major challenge for child actors. And it really is a testament to their abilities that anybody can get any kind of performance out with all of the other stuff they have to worry about.
Right. But the difference, I think, too, Allison, between child actors and adult actors is, you know, as far as getting paid goes, these young kids are so young. I mean, they know they're getting paid, but they also know their parents are, controlling a lot of that to make sure that the money's going in the right spot. So these kids, in a lot of ways, it's like a labor of love for them when they're kids, when they're doing it. And I'm not saying it's not for the adults, but the adults, they want
But you,
they are, making sure they get paid a
well,
lot. They want to make sure they're
it,
doing it where the
it
child
can
actors,
be.
I
Uh, uh,
think, are kids, and they maybe
no,
don't, but
I'm
tell me
sorry.
what you think about that.
I'm sorry. You are aware that many of the children you see on television are supporting their entire families.
Yeah. Oh, I'm
That is,
sure.
that is the income. There is no one in the house working. I was very lucky. My whole family had jobs. My family were in show business, and both my parents worked. Both of them had real jobs. So they did pay their own bills, and my money did indeed. I had a certain percentage that went into a trust fund until I was 18, but I still had to pay agents and managers and publicists and pay to have my photos done and all of the things an actor has to do. I had to do all of those things, and I luckily those things are tax deductible, which I also learned because I had to go to the accountant when I was 12 when it was time to file tax returns. Many parents do not do that, and it's true. Many child actors don't even know what they've made. They don't know where the money's going. The parents actually take all of their money and steal it. And that's why they instituted the Coogan account, so that in cases where the parents are not honest and steal all the money, there's at least 15% has been put aside until they're 18. without that, there were many parents took all the children's money. And then other parents don't do that. Other parents say, absolutely, you've got the 15% in the Coogan and this other money here, we're going to have another bank account for that. And you're going to pay for college and you're going to buy a car and you're going to have like buy normal things with it. But not all. Some parents, it's just kind of mind blowing that they would do that, but they do. And then other parents are on very hard times. And if the parents have moved, which they sometimes do from another part of the country to LA to work, or if they didn't have someone, I was again very lucky, my Auntie Marion took me to the set. If they don't have that, sometimes one of the parents will give up their job just to take the kids to auditions, take the kids to the set every day because someone has to be there. And if they do that, then the child's income does indeed become a major factor in paying the rent and buying food. So there are some child actors that don't know what they're getting paid, but many of them know what they're getting paid because they wrote a check for the rent. And others, if they're lucky, it is going into a fund for college. Now, I was very lucky, as I said, my money was put aside and I got the rest of my money. Some kids don't know what they're making. And what you kind of want to do is when they get to be older, I mean, if they're 6, it's really hard to explain to them how much they're making. And you got a 3-picture deal and you got a guaranteed 7 out of 13 episodes. But when they get to be a teenager, it's important to explain to a child actor how much they're making because they're going to get their trust fund at 18. And you don't want them literally blindsided going, I was getting a $20 allowance and now I actually have real money. I don't know. They not know how to rent an apartment or open a bank account. So that kind of training is really important. But many kids, and if they're super young, yeah, they're often the babies are put into by their parents. But some really young kids, like Shannon Doherty, when Shannon Doherty started on Little House, she absolutely knew what she wanted to do. She was talking about what kind of career she wanted and what types of actors she modeled herself after and where she saw herself in 5 and 10 years. So there are kids, and when I say kids, these would be the older ones, 10 and 11 and 12, who absolutely are thinking about what kind of shows they want to be in and what kind of stuff they want to do, which is kind of mind blowing for all the people. But indeed, if you've grown up in the business or it's something you've set your mind to, well, like sports, I mean, obviously a child who's competing at the Olympic level or playing tennis professionally certainly knows what they're doing. It's not a labor of love for a child gymnast at the Olympics.
Right. And listen, this happens a lot with a lot of auditions. Sometimes you audition for roles that you don't get, but then you get surprised and you get a better role. And I think you auditioned for Laura and Mary, and
Indeed.
it didn't work out. But you know what? I say this, and I wanted to ask you this. We're going to talk more about your character, but a lot of people are identified by that one particular character.
Mhm.
Henry Winkler is identified as the
Oh,
Fonz.
oh my God,
Jalea
yes,
White,
right?
yeah, Jalea White is identified as Steve Urkel. And people will always think of you and they're going to think of Nellie Oleson. And some people don't like being, characterized by one part. But I think in a lot of cases, what they don't realize is if somebody thinks of you in that way, that means you played that part tremendous. And
Right.
that's really a compliment. It's not a negative thing.
Well, exactly. Every actor says, I want it to be real. I want it to be so real that the audience suspends all disbelief. I want the audience to not even feel like they're watching a TV show or a movie. I want them to see me and go, yes, that's a real person. Okay, so what happens if you actually do that correctly? If you pull that off and they believe it, then you sometimes run into the trouble of typecasting because they're like, wasn't that real? And I know there are people, I've met people who said, I was terrified of you as a child, and part of me still is. And I have to say, thank you. What a compliment. When people believe that it's real, I almost want to say, well, I must have done a heck of a job because if you thought that was it, that's like amazing. So I'm proud of that. But yeah, it is really weird. There can be typecasting, and with Little House, I know there was a mindset of some casting people that we all lived in the 1800s, and it was like a big deal for it to be shot in something present day. I mean, I've had the luxury of being able to do stand-up comedy and do theater, which then carried me through to today, where now I kind of do everything. Um, but you're right about the better roles because, yeah, the number of times I auditioned for things and I didn't get it, and I thought, oh darn, and then it was like, no, that was terrible. This is much better. I read for Laura and Mary, and I knew that I wasn't right for them. And then they made the pilot, and I went, well, these two are great. They've done it. And they called me back to read at Paramount, and I didn't know what I was reading for. I hadn't read the books, and I didn't know there was a Nellie Oleson yet. And I get there, and I'm like, well, how many people are in this show? And of course, I wind up getting Nellie. I read it. They started laughing hysterically. It was Michael Landon, the other producers, and they totally lost their minds. And I was hired on the spot, and it was perfect. And it was the perfect thing for me because she was funny. She was awful, but she was funny. There was so much to do as the character. And I absolutely, 50 years later, to this day, I so much prefer the fact that I was Nellie Oleson than if I had been Laura Mary. Absolutely.
Right. And the thing about Nellie too, Allison, is if you really think about it, like you don't recognize this if you're a kid watching the show, like I didn't. But as I watched the reruns and things like that, I think Nellie had no choice to be the way she was because her mother was very vindictive. And when you, who are you going to take after when you're growing up? You're going to take after your parents, and most daughters are gonna try to emulate their mothers. So her mother was very like, she was very like devious in a lot of ways. So I think that's why Nellie was the way she was.
Oh, I think, well, nowadays we would say that her mother was a narcissist or was narcissistically disturbed, had a narcissistic personality disorder. And that's why Nellie was a mess. I mean, back then it's just kind of like, well, she's awful, the daughter's awful. But it's interesting over the years, I've had more and more people who've been so much more analytical about it in modern times said, well, poor Nellie. Look at her mother. Look at her mother. The way her mother talked to her and the way that she told her that, you're they're just jealous of you. But look what the mother does when Nellie gets her hotel, the restaurant hotel for the graduation gift, and and Mrs. Olson, the brilliant Catherine McGregor, starts saying, you know why your father married me. He was part interest in the store, blah blah blah, and flat out says, time for you to get married. And I'm sure there's lots of boys who want to marry you. However, and just comes right out and says, you're awful. Nobody wants to marry you. You need this hotel restaurant to get a man. How insulting. What a mean, terrible thing to say to your own child. But that's the kind of stuff Mrs. Olson did. She said, oh, Nellie, you're perfect. You're wonderful. But then she made her know that no, not really. And she kind of separated her from everyone else by making her so spoiled that she wouldn't have friends. Awful. And nowadays people see that. They go, look what the mother's doing. Oh, that's terrible. And the father, he tries, but he doesn't stop her. And then she's got that brother Willie, who's an idiot. And they say, well, of course she's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, and you played it so well. I mean, like
Thank you.
it is not easy for a child to play a villain. Like in a lot of ways, Nellie was the villain of the show.
Oh,
And
yeah,
there's two
yeah.
episodes. I would think one of these two episodes were your favorite. Number one, when Nellie falls down the hill. If that's not it, I would think number two is when she trashes
Oh, but
her
how
room
do I?
and just starts
Oh,
throwing stuff everywhere,
yeah.
and she has that meltdown. you know, I would think one of those two. But I'll tell you what, both times in both instances when I'm watching this, not as a kid again, but when I'm seeing them in reruns, I'm saying to myself, God, this kid was so talented. And I think
Thank you.
that that sometimes goes a little underrated for you because again, who did they love on the show? They loved Michael Landon. They loved Laura because she was the star of the show. But this kid that's playing the bad kid on here is doing it, and she's doing it almost effortlessly. And I really think that was a credit to your acting.
Thank you, thank you. Well, I do. I mean, there was the great Patty McCormick, of course, who played Rhoda in The Bad Seed, who killed people. So she really had it down. The villain is more challenging, and usually kids don't get asked to play the villain that often. I mean, Julie Dawn Cole did a lovely job. Veruca Salt. Once in a blue moon, you get a really good kid villain part. And I remember that's why I was so happy. I said, this normally doesn't happen. This is not a normal part. When do I get asked at my age to, play this terrible person? And so I was very, very pleased with it. And yeah, I know there were days where it's just, yes, this seems almost easy. It's so enjoyable because I really enjoy doing it and just kind of let everything out. And then there were scenes where I went, okay, how can I make this really terrible? So I did put in the old college try, the good effort there. The two scenes you talk about, same episode. Yep, my favorite episode. Most Big Nelly fans' favorite episode, Bunny. I pretend to be paralyzed. And Laura finally catches me and shoves me down that hill in the wheelchair. And then I'm so furious at being caught. I trash the room. The day we shot the scene, I trashed the room. They said, "Okay, here's the deal." Like the prop men are there with the director. They go, "Okay, now this vase, don't touch this. This is actually an antique, so don't touch that one. And now this one, this is a reproduction, and we have 5 more in the back. So if you break it, it's totally okay. You could smash this." "Oh, good, good." And now these books, they're not going to break. You can throw these on the floor. Everything on this table's fine. It won't break, or we have a place to smash that. And they pulled on the drapes. Yeah, you can pull the curtains down if you want. Really? Yeah, go ahead. And they went through the room. Furniture by furniture, said, "This is breakable. This isn't breakable. Don't break this. Go ahead and break that." And I'm like, God, I like taking mental notes of which things to break, not. And so then had to go berserk, like I was completely out of control, but going, "Okay, yeah, don't break that. Oh, yeah, break this." And remembering which things not to throw. Oh, God, it was so much fun.
Yeah. And you know what I think about too, Allison, is the writers in a lot of ways gave the Nellie character as she became an adult. She became a better person because what happened was, I really believe, because you look at the updated version of Nell when she had kids and got married, she really was a good person. She needed to break away from her mother.
Yes,
That's
yeah.
the honest to God truth, because she was a much different person once she broke away from her mother. But that was always the thing. And like when your kids, again, I go back to it, you're like, oh, this kid is so annoying. She's doing this, she's doing that. But when you really watch it and you pay attention, you almost feel sorry for Nellie because she
Mhm.
doesn't mean to be mean to Laura, but she's kind of jealous of Laura in the sense that Laura has what she really wants because her mother could spoil her and talk good about her to everybody, but she wanted her mother's love and she didn't feel like she had that.
You have nailed it. That is it. What I always felt was compelled by was jealousy. Absolutely jealousy. Nellie was jealous of Laura because look at Laura's family. I mean, Ma Ingalls, she's got the perfect mom. Karen Grassley is Ma Ingalls. She's got this beautiful, perfect mother and who can cook and everything. It's lovely. And then her father is Charles Ingalls, is Michael Landon, his pa. And you can't beat
Yeah,
that. So, and then here she's got her awful mother. So, yeah, she was insane. Hang on one second. I have a cat here. Here,
yeah, no
do you
problem.
want to be in the show? She was insanely jealous and she was acting out. It was true. And then clearly she wanted to be loved for herself, not because she was, the spoiled daughter. And then when Percival showed up and didn't want to deal with any of her nonsense, any of her BS or her mother's, but loved her for her, it was a breakthrough for her. She could get away, say hi. Okay, now you're going to go play. Cats and things. But yeah, that's absolutely, yeah. She had to get away from the mother, and then she was great. She was fine. It's true.
Yeah. Allison, the thing about the show too, again, there was drama, there was some comedy involved, but there were some tough episodes for fans to watch because, I think about when the
Mhm.
character who was it, Carrie fell down
Mhm.
the hole,
Oh
and
yes,
you're
yes.
thinking that whole episode that she might die, and at the end it looked like they had given up hope. And there
Right.
were so many other, yep,
I'm gonna a terrible walk off camera, but I have to walk off camera for 1 second. I don't like
yeah,
that.
no worries. Yeah. And of course, folks, Allison is doing a great job. It's really a
This is awesome.
pleasure to.
There. I,
Yep.
my cat
And
is out of control. There, she's fine now. That's it. She does this. She comes out for interviews. It's just terrible. But yeah, I mean, we didn't think Carrie was going to get out of that well. I mean, how many people died during the terrible death toll on that show? Oh my God.
oh yeah, I think of James, the character James, his parents, they get killed, they lose control of their wagon.
Yeah,
And it was tough episodes. Like there were
and he
some tough
almost
ones,
died.
I think of the
Yeah,
yeah, I think of the
James Gibson.
raccoon episode when the
That's
character
the one.
got bit. Yeah, that was hard to
I
watch.
cry at the raccoon episodes. It's the only one that makes me cry. The poor raccoon, when you realize and just this, and you go, "Oh, the raccoon doesn't have rabies. It's okay."
Yeah,
But yeah, and side note, baby Carrie, of course, was played by twins, as many very small children are in shows. And the joke between the two of them is one of them filmed the scene where she falls down into the mine shaft, and the other one on a different day filmed the scene when they pull her out. So we always say, "Oh yeah, you're still at the bottom of that mine shaft, aren't you?" Yeah, Rachel's still at the bottom of the mine shaft. But in the balloon, when baby Carrie got in the hot air balloon and took off,
oh yeah, yeah,
apparently Robin is still in that balloon because they filmed her getting in, the other one getting out. It's this
right.
poor twins what they had to put up with.
But I'll tell you what, a lot of times when you read the books and whether it's a movie and they make it into a series, whatever the case might be, sometimes it's not as good as the books.
Right,
But these
right.
writers, these writers made this show just as good as the books. I mean, it was great TV all the time. And again, there was some sad, like we just talked about, some
Oh
sad
yeah.
episodes and some tough episodes to watch. But I always felt like it was real when I was watching it. I didn't feel like
Hmm, hmm.
the actors were fake. I didn't feel like
Sure.
anything was not realistic. And
This is the
that was a
thing
great show.
that I get from Little House from people all over the world, that people react to it on an emotional, visceral level, not an intellectual level, because they said, but it was so real that it seems so real. They didn't feel like, oh yeah, I'm watching this here show, eating popcorn. They were like, this is really happening. And that these were people they really knew. And a lot of that is, well, Michael Landon. I mean, the books are brilliant source material, but Michael directed so many of the episodes, wrote so many of the episodes, and was so involved in production. He knew it's something about. He read the books and it clicked in his head. This is what I see. I get this. I see what Laura wanted to tell people. And even though people say, oh, but there's so many episodes that weren't in the books and that just went off on these crazy plot lines, but he understood what the Ingalls family were about. He understood why Laura wrote the books. And so that's kind of the emotion that is in the show, and it still resonates today.
Yeah. And let me ask you, Allison, I mean, it's the 50th anniversary. I
Oh
mean,
my
is
God,
it
right?
hard to believe? Is it hard to believe? Because I bet you could still remember some of your episodes and scenes
Oh,
like it was
yeah,
yesterday,
yeah,
and it's
yeah.
been 50 years. That has to be really cool for you and your fellow cast members to be able to celebrate a 50th anniversary because that you made this show successful. All of you worked together to make it so well. I think it was on 9 years, maybe, and you
Mhm.
were on for seven of them. And so, I mean, you're like part of that core group of Little House on the Prairie. And like I said to you earlier, to have that character and to be associated with it, but to be associated with a show that's Little House on the Prairie, that's got to be your proudest moment in your career.
It's been shown in over 140 countries. I'm in France part of the year because I do a whole comedy review over there. They can't get enough, and we get mail from all over. We had people that are big fan of Vento. You can see me from Peru. Hi, we came in from Peru because we grew up watching the show there. People just from all over the world just loving the show, and it's mind blowing for us. All of us at 50 years later, people still love it. But 50 years later, we have the original generation, the VHS generation, the DVD generation, and now people are streaming it on Amazon. They're watching it on their phone. So it's just amazing for all of us that this show and to be honest, many of us, we got the show, we kind of went, oh, well, this is a good job. And like when it was done, we went, oh, well, we're done. Thinking that it would like still be a thing 50 years later. Never could have believed it. And it really is amazing to have been on a show like that where people are still this touched by it 50 years later. It's mind blowing.
Yeah, it really is. And what I think a lot of people may not realize about you, Allison, is during the show's run, you started doing stand-up comedy. I think you were 15 years old.
Correct.
And again, I mean, I think stand-up comedy is the hardest thing for any person to do because you're getting up there in front of a crowd. You have to be funny. And if you don't see this audience reacting to you right away, you know you're not doing it right. So it takes a lot of courage to go up there and do it.
It does. It's like, what is it? I was reading something that the biggest fear that most people have, the most severe phobia anyone has, and it's not even like, planes or spiders or anything, it's fear of public speaking. Most people are terrified of public speaking. So the idea of getting up and doing stand up, where you just stand there with the mic and start talking to people, has got to be the most stressful, terrifying thing. And yet that's the thing I decided would be a good idea to do at 50. And it kind of stuck. It worked out. I mean, it seemed right for my personality. I didn't sing or dance, and stand up seemed to work. And then it really did work. And over the years, it's just grown and grown. And then in the last several years, I started doing a one woman show called Confessions of a Prairie Bitch, where it's a show, it's stand up, but it's also all true stories from my life. And it's hysterical. It's hilarious if I say so myself. People really, really love it. And it's because of the show that I wound up doing the book. Usually people do the book and then the show. I did the show and then the book, but there you go.
Yeah, and you've kind of done that one woman show like you just
Hmm.
mentioned, which is very popular. But in the book too, that what people don't realize is sure, it talks about your career, but there was also trauma that you went through in your life, and people got
Right.
to, see that. And that's the thing too, Allison. You actors are normal human beings like myself and everybody else. They may have fame and they may have, a lot of stuff going on in their life, like, success and things like that. But they don't, like anything else, they go through struggles as well. They're normal people. And I think sometimes people forget that and they just say, oh, they got the best life in the world. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean you do,
Right.
because there is some trauma that comes with it sometimes.
Yeah, indeed. And I talk about kind of everything. As I say, when I wrote the book, I threw in everything and the kitchen sink. And I talk about my life that I was abused as a child. I was bullied at school, et cetera, et cetera. And I wasn't really that happy. And really getting Little House was a wonderful thing for me because, first of all, it was a great environment. Michael and all the people on the set were very supportive people who really took care of the kids and made us feel safe and wanted and cared for. But also the character of Nellie, when you're growing up and you've gone through any kind of trauma, there's all this sort of residual anger and it has like nowhere to go and just terrible things happen to you physically and mentally. But imagine that right in adolescence, at the worst part of having that anger, you get a job where you can scream and yell and throw things and be angry all the time in episodes, just angry and it's just vent it all. What a great thing. What an incredible cathartic thing to have happened to me. So I really got lucky on that because the time I really needed somewhere to vent, I really got it.
Yeah. And, I would say that when you're able to write down your thoughts and you're able to just write about what went on in your life, your career, and things like that, I'm not saying like all of it is enjoyable because there's some tough spots in there that you got to write about. But I think it's enjoyable in the sense that you are kind of telling
Yep.
your story
Yep.
and you're putting it on pen and paper. You're able to do that. And that had to be something that you really enjoyed writing that book.
I did. And and I said so much of it is, well, funny. And you know how it is with life, like some things you go, well, I'll laugh at this later. Many things in my life that were kind of like not necessarily fun at the time are hysterical now. And find dark humor in many things. And I've survived everything I've survived because have a nicely warped sense of humor. And growing up in Hollywood and growing up with my crazy family and then being abused and then becoming Nellie Oleson and then having people hate me because I'm Nellie Oleson and throw things at me. All of these bizarre things that I've gone through, I put them all in there and then there is also humor in it. And yeah, it was very enjoyable to tell a lot of those stories.
Right. One of the things that really impresses me about you, Allison, is again, and a lot of you see so many stories about actors that give back and things like that. And you had a very close friend by the name of Steve Tracy. He
Mm-hmm.
was a fellow actor. I believe like he was
Percival.
also like in Little House for quite a few
Percival
episodes.
is my
Yeah,
husband. He was the guy who
yeah,
told Mrs. Olson to shut up. He was awesome.
yeah, yeah, and he was a great actor, but you started this in his memory. You joined AIDS Project Los Angeles, and then you became an AIDS hotline counselor. And AIDS was very like in the middle '80s.
Oh my
AIDS
God.
really,
Yeah.
we started learning more and more about it, and then in the early '90s, more and more like and it's just a terrible disease. And you really like did a lot of charitable work for that cause. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is in the early 80s, people really didn't know what was happening at first. They knew there was this disease, I think it was called GRID initially, gay-related cancer. They didn't know what was happening. And to have a disease that attacked the immune system was very new, even for the world of medicine, to see a disease that was attacking the immune system. It's like, what do? Your immune system's there to fight disease. And oops, here's one that kills the immune system. And they hadn't really seen that, not in those numbers. He'd seen it in rare cases for, transplant patients. Suddenly people are having this. So it was a new thing. And for the average person, people were very freaked out. They didn't know if they were going to get it from mosquitoes or off a doorknob or what. And it got really weird. And then Steve, who played Percival, the wonderful man who
Yeah.
told Mrs. Olsen to shut up and tame Nellie, here he went public with his diagnosis. And he was my friend, and he got very, very sick. And he finally said, "Look, it's AIDS." And then he did. He did TV interviews and newspaper interviews, which was unheard of at the time, and I wanted to help him. But, his family stood by him. His mom and his sister flew out from Florida. They're wonderful people. And so his friends and family stood by. But other people didn't have that So when volunteering for AIDS Project Los Angeles, I was able to help a lot of people who didn't have that. And one of the things I did was volunteer for the Southern California AIDS Hotline because people were just there was no internet, there was no Google, and they were just people were calling. They didn't know. They were, how do I get it? How do I not get it? My friend is sick. What do I do? Oh my God, my son is sick. I mean, people were just devastated. Or they'd call and say, look, I want to get tested. I don't even know where to go. I want to see a doctor. Who do I call? And we had all the info. We had all the info. We had the testing centers, we had the doctors who could help you, the whole bit. And it was incredible because people were asking me when they found out Steve was like all these like, medical questions I didn't know. So that was part of compelled me to go down there and take the training for the hotline. So not only I could volunteer, but also answer people's question in the media and the press. And it was amazing. And there were some really cool people like Joan Rivers was incredible. She was there at the beginning and Morgan Fairchild. And these people were doing things, but it was a very small group of people who were doing anything back then.
Yeah, and I just think it's really like wonderful what you did and how many actors get involved in this and because it just shows that again, they're giving something back. They want to do something, they want to make a difference and not just in TV, not just in films. They want to be able to, do something in the real world that stands out.
There's a thing is one of the things is that advantages, if you're going to be famous, there's plenty of disadvantages and stress and things, but there's some very big advantages to being famous, even a little bit famous, is you have an opportunity. You can get on TV or the internet now or the radio. And if you talk about something, you have a larger audience. And so if someone is even slightly famous, I say, get out there. It doesn't matter what it is. I don't know. Tell people to adopt a kitten. Tell them to go plant a tree. Tell them to go volunteer at the food bank. Something. You have, they used to call it a bully pulpit. You have this built-in audience because you've been on television where you can say things that are useful and helpful. And I was like, well, I guess they're asking me questions. What if I gave them the right answers? And it really worked out. And then, of course, the director of the Southern California AIDS Hotline back then in the 80s was a guy named Bob Schoonover. And as time went on, sort of like the movie When Harry Met Sally, after years and years of being friends, we finally went on a date and we just celebrated our 31st wedding anniversary. Go figure.
And Allison, there has to be a real, you have to feel really good about yourself and the work you did in your career when 32 years after you started playing Nellie, you receive the TV Land Award for the character most in need of a timeout. And I thought that was great because it really says that they looked at Nellie and said, you know what? She played Allison played that character to perfection.
I have it. Character most desperately in need of a timeout. You know, most people don't
Yeah.
keep their TV Land Award. The TV Land Award was sort of thought of as people didn't take it seriously. They said, "Oh, it's just for the show. It's not like the Oscars where there's like sealed envelopes and a big voting body." And I said, "I want it." They said, "Wait, you want to keep yours?" Many people just accept the awards, but they don't even care. They said, "It's not like an Oscar. It's not like." I said, "No, it's the only thing I've ever won, and I won this legit. I still have it." And character most in need of a timeout. And by God, I still have it. It was the most proud moment of my life.
And you know what kind of bothers me, Allison? You just said people say they don't keep them because they're not the Oscars. But I'll tell you what, these awards are a lot more real than the Oscars because to me, the Oscars are just political. That's all they are. There have been so many great actors that should have won Oscars
No,
and didn't even get nominated. Where
right?
TV Land, I always felt like TV Land did it right. They
More, it's just
treated
more
these
about the
actors.
fans. This
Yeah.
is more about the viewers. So yeah, it is kind of more real.
Yeah, I believe so. And then, of course, you get the Lifetime Achievement Award for the Young Artist
Yeah,
Former
that's right.
Child Star in 2002. And that had to make you feel great because, again, they saw the body of work that you did. And that's why I know deep down, well, I know you know it anyway, that this is like a character that you are forever grateful for playing for because
Totally.
it was so rewarding, not just, for fame and, fortune and things like that, but because of what it did for your career. Because fans to this day, and there's 140 countries that show Little House on the Prairie, and then you've got fans everywhere that still love the character. When I was advertising that you were going to be on my show, so many people on Facebook were like, "Love her. When you going to interview her?"
Yep.
That's what I mean about Nellie, she was really loved by everybody.
I know, which is so weird. It's like if you hate me, and now years later, people going, "But I love that character. Oh, I love to hate her." But people really love the character, and it's just what a thing to have, what a legacy to have. It's just it's fantastic.
It really is. And the thing is too, Allison, I always love seeing this. When you're a kid, you always wonder, oh, did uh did Melissa and Allison like each other in real life because they hated each other on screen? And you always hear this. This is by so many. They're like best friends in real life, and
I
you
mean,
and her got along great off the camera. And I mean, that's a credit to again the way you two work because you two
yep,
really
yep.
made it look like you hated each other, but off camera, you two were the best of friends.
But Melissa and I have talked about this. We think it made it easier in a way because, I mean, if we didn't really know each other well or we didn't like each other, it could have been kind of difficult. But because we adored each other, we thought each other was just like the greatest thing ever. Um, and we're like kind of like a sisterly thing. It made it easier. No, we could choreograph our own fight scenes. We knew nobody was going to get hurt, and because we knew each other, I what was it Melissa said? I think we could go further than maybe people could have gone. And so we could just go totally nuts and pretend we hate each other. It was like having a 7-year pillow fight. I mean, it was hilarious. It struck us dreadfully funny. It was all we could do not to burst out laughing. But I think because she had a very showbiz family and I had a very showbiz family, I think we sort of like bonded over that. We were very similar in many ways.
Yeah, and you had touched on Michael a lot during this interview, and what I really love hearing from you is just how much he looked out for everybody, the
Yep.
kids especially, because here's a guy who was so successful when he was on Bonanza. He was like the most popular guy on
He was.
Bonanza, and then he gets Little House on the Prairie, and he's going to be the star of that show. But again, no ego. He was a friend to everybody, and that really says a lot about him as a human being. So. I know that like being able to work on the same show with him, that's got to be one of your top highlights of your life.
It was amazing. He was an extremely unusual person. I mean, to say no ego, well, it's interesting. On the one hand, yes, ego. I mean, he knew he was good looking. Oh, everyone I know goes, "Oh, he was so beautiful." And they go, "Yes," and he did know it. He knew he was good looking. He knew people were tuning in to look at him. It's like, "Oh, let me get the shirt off." He worked out, took care of his tan, made his hair perfect. But he also was amazingly good looking and just compelling. I mean, my friend Pat Leverton was just saying, he said, everything about him was like he was a star. He said he was Michael Landon from 50 feet away. It was just he'd smile. I mean, people talk about somebody lighting up the room and 5,000 watt smile. He had it. But in a way, there also wasn't the same kind of ego you hear about from other people because um, he would share a dressing room if we had a lot of people on location. He'd share a dressing room with someone he knew, was friends with, usually Victor French or someone like that. He didn't really go in for fancy dressing rooms, had the same one as everyone else because, of course, he said, I'm never in it. He was never in his dressing room. He was busy directing and doing things. He's like, who's got time to be in the dressing room? Um, and he was the first one there and the last to leave. It wasn't like, oh, well, I'm done. You people go. No, he was there sunrise to sunset at the same time as everyone else. And he expected people to work very, very hard, but he was working hard. He put in the work. And that was kind of amazing to see. He wasn't having somebody else do stuff for him. He was absolutely hands on. He was doing everything. Um, it was very impressive, very impressive. He was a little bit, probably a little bit workaholic. Um, he was very much of the 70s. He liked to wear the open shirt and the gold chains. And yes, he did. He smoked Marlboros. He drank. It was the 1970s. All these crew members and the guys were all drinking and smoking. It was kind of weird. Nowadays, you wouldn't do that on a set. Nowadays, on a set, you'd have the craft services would have organic food and gluten-free muffins. And back then we had donuts and bear claws and black coffee. But, it was a different era. But he was very much he was kind of like people's friend, very much about the children. He had a certain immaturity. He liked childish jokes and pranks. He was very silly and liked to laugh at things. But he was so good with us kids. Someone in his position, with all of his money and all of his fame and all of his power and multiple hit series, could have just been, hey, you brats, get over here. No, no. He treated us like actors, like we were there to do a job. He treated us with respect and was really nice to us. Um, None of the kids ever had a problem, said, oh, yeah, oh, that terrible Michael Landon. Um, everybody who was on Little House as a child actor talked about how it was like winning the lottery to get on that show. I've heard from friends of mine who were on other shows, it wasn't as much fun as we had on Little House. And that's really due to Michael Landon.
Yeah, he really was a credit to the business, and it was so sad when that happened to him. It really was,
So young.
just a tragedy.
He was 53, for heaven's sake.
Yeah,
53.
I know, and it was just awful. Um, Allison, let me ask you, what, I can't say 2024 because based on what the books are, but just if Nellie is your current age right now, what do you think she would be doing right now? What do you think, what would Nellie Oleson be doing at this moment in time, like in
Well,
her life?
we've all thought about this because let's see, there's the book Nellie, and then there's the show Nellie, and the real. I know that the real Nellie, her family moved to Tillamook, Oregon, and she married a guy named Henry Curry. But the show Nellie, we talked about this. My friend Pamela Roy Lance, who played Sarah Carter on the show, Sarah, her character was running a newspaper and writing articles. And we were talking one day, and she said, in one scene, she says something about, oh, Nellie, when I come back for a visit, well, I need to interview you for the paper about your life in New York. And she said, and I never get around to it. What was that like? So we sat down together. We worked it out. We said, okay, so Nellie and Percival get married. And when Percival's dad dies, Nellie and Percival supposedly moved to New York to take care of his mom and the store. This was the story. So what was that like? It would have been the late 1800s, the 1880s. New York in the 1880s, they were building the subway. They were starting to have the first subway cars.
Yeah.
They would have had electricity, unlike Walnut Grove, but the beginnings of it. And they would have had street cars and things like, and it was very bustling. New York was a big city by the 1880s. It was crowded. And what would their store have been like? And she would have been running the store in a Jewish neighborhood in New York with her husband and trying to institute modern methods of bookkeeping and this whole. I mean, it would have been wild. It would have been quite a show. And let's see, it would be if we went 100, kept going to the day, since it was 1874 and we were in 1974, the characters would be living in, 1924, almost 1925. So Nellie would still be alive. I always talked about it would be great if we had an episode, if we did do a get together, an episode where like Nellie has, a relapse. And what if when she got older, things didn't go well? Maybe Percival died and she kind of got like the lady in Great Expectations and locked herself in the house and Laura has to come get her. We've come up with so many scenarios for that, just the cast laughing and thinking about what would we do with our characters if it was then 1925. And I don't know that they'll do a reboot like that, but it would be fascinating. When you get into the 20s, you get into um, Laura's daughter, Rose Wilder, was a very successful published author by then. So Rose's story, somebody needs to make the Rose Wilder story. That would be epic.
Yeah, it really would be. Before we go, Allison, what could we expect? What is it? What are you doing these days, and what projects could we look forward to down the
So
road?
much is going on. Okay, so much is going on. So we're wrapping up finally 2024. We did so much this year. Me, the other cast members for the 50th anniversary. It started in January and did not stop until like September-ish. We were just like bang, 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 go, go, go. Oh, yeah, and then I went off to France for October. So it didn't really stop. And then in November, I went to Ireland. So just actually stopped like a couple of weeks ago. December, I have a show. I'm doing a show on Sunday, a pay-per-view out of the living room, and then I'm going to try not to do anything in January. It's just going to kick in. I'm going to March. I'm going to France in March. I have first shows last week in February. Several shows there of Nellie Oleson en flamme les années 80. Nellie Oleson lights up the 80s. We're planning more Little House events. This year, the cast have gotten together and we're plotting how to do these cast reunion fan events because it was just so wild this year, got a little chaotic, how to do them in very orderly fashion so we can spend more time with the fans. And we're plotting a bunch of events. I do know that in May, I will be in New York doing my show on Mother's Day, Confessions of Prairie Bitch. And later in May, Dean Butler, Al Manzo, and I will be in Tulsa, Oklahoma for Country Con, which is supposed to be fabulous. So tons of stuff coming up, and
I'll tell
keep
you
an eye
what.
out.
Well, I'll tell you what, Allison, I definitely would like to have you and Dean on together to talk
Oh,
about that at some
please.
point.
Because we have
That
a
would be great.
podcast. Have you seen
Yeah,
the
because
podcast?
I had Dean on not too long ago. Great
Yeah,
guy,
yeah.
but I really do applaud all the work you're doing and what the memories you gave me as a kid when I was growing up and
Thank you.
things
Thank
like
you.
that. And again, I've appreciated your character so much more when I became an adult, when I really was able to understand the character. And I think
Right.
you played it, like I said, to perfection. And
Thank you.
you are a credit to what you do, and you're a hardworking person. I really do appreciate you giving me all the
Oh,
time today.
thank you. Thank you so much. Very kind of you.
Thank you. Well, folks, you know what? You got to know this young woman the last hour or so. What a remarkable person she is. And let's just say this, okay? As far as her career goes, Little House on the Prairie was a very popular show. And you cannot think of that show and watch that show and not think of the adult actors, characters, of course, Charles and Carolyn. And you cannot watch that show and not think about the children on there. And the two children you think about the most are Laura and Nellie. And that is a credit to the work they've done and the show they put out there. For In the Spotlight, I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone.
Good night.
All right.